There's been plenty of debate about Joe Mixon and his future here in Cincinnati. Let's get into it with a guy who's discussed it from every angle on social media. Joe Goodberry is here to break down Joe Mixon and his future.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome into the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm James Rapien, joined by Joe Goodberry with Jake Lisco out today. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. And while we're about to attack this Joe Mixon debate, dilemma, discussion from every single angle, but make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Over 15,000 reached that mark earlier this week, have subscribed. So make sure you join that club or follow wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure you follow Joe Goodberry, speaking of following, at Joe Goodberry. This is a throwback to the throwback edition of Locked On Bengals, because day one, Locked On Bengals listeners know that I would bring in Joe Goodberry when it was definitely just audio only, for some film breakdowns, to talk about the Vontaze Burfict days or the Brandon LaFell, Andy Dalton days.
Why are you bringing up the bad days?
Well, it was just back then, right? Including draft Joe Mixon days. We certainly talked a lot about Joe Mixon.
Those were exciting days.
Podcast. They were. I think people forget how exciting of a prospect. You know, we're looking at all these different prospects. Exciting of a prospect on the field, of course, that Joe Mixon was. And that's what I think is one of the many interesting things is I was really high on Mixon. I can also see why $12.7 million cap hit, that's unreasonable. And you got to find a way to lighten the load there if you're going to keep him around. And it's stemmed into this huge social media thing, and you have fans on one side, fans on the other. And so I want to discuss it. What are your thoughts on Joe Mixon as of right now and his future in Cincinnati?
Yeah, I actually like that it ended up leading that way of we did like Joe Mixon coming out of that class. Honestly, if I was ranking him this year, he'd probably be the number 2 back. He'd probably just be right behind Bijan Robinson. And now the value has probably shifted even less at running back in these 5 years, 6 years since then. But at the same time, he was a very good prospect. I thought he was the best running back in that class. And then for years we talked about, hey, the Bengals aren't using him right. They're not. He should be a tremendous receiver. He should be helping this team in the passing game way more than he has been. And last year they did, and it really helped, I think, probably extend what I think of him going forward and what I thought of him last year, because I didn't think he was as effective as a runner. But at the same time, if he's going to be a big part of the passing game, which is really where the dilemma starts to break off, because can you be a big receiver without being a big blocker in this offense? I think that'll be a big discussion we have here. But at the same time, yeah, that $12.76 million, when you're a team that's knocking on the door of the Super Bowl, are you maximizing the roster? Are you maximizing the cap space if you're carrying such a heavy weight at a position that, whether you look at data or just use your eyes and watch the film, you would say, I'm not sure he's worth that money, or any running back is worth spending in this offense at that price.
And, maybe Christian McCaffrey would be, right? Maybe there is that perfect fit, but he's not Christian McCaffrey, and he's not having that type of impact. And I think the numbers look okay. Like, they don't look awful. I agree with you. You look at his yards per carry this past year, certainly down. But the receiving element, I think he's gotten a better rapport with Joe Burrow. But the thing I always come back to is this team plans on playing in a bunch of big games. And the past 2 seasons, game on the line, right? Heck, Zach Taylor was asked in Super Bowl 56, hey, should we get Joe out there? He's like, keep Samaje out there. And at the time, a lot of people were like, oh, well, why the hell wouldn't you have Joe Mixon out there? And I get it. I understand that. Short yardage, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. And then this past year, we saw it again. And I think a lot of fans said, oh, well, they operate a little better with Samaje Perine on the field. And so it hurts to lose Perine. but he wasn't commanding anywhere near the $12.7 million cap hit that Mixon is. And so that's what I keep coming back to, is if you can't play in the most meaningful moments at a position that you're right is devalued, the writing seems to be on the wall when it comes to the $12.7 million.
Yeah, so I think that leads to the conclusion of he doesn't really fit the offense. So if it's 2 years in a row, because it wasn't just the Super Bowl. If you remember week 1 of 2021, they've got to drive down the field in overtime to beat the Vikings, right? They're at the 50-yard line, and it's going to sound exactly like the Super Bowl. It's 3rd and 1, and Samaje Perine's in the game, and they give it to him. He gets stuffed, just like the Super Bowl. Next play is the play action Uzama on the the wheel route on the other side. Exactly. Yep. Right. So they should have pulled that off in the Super Bowl. But that's where it changed a little bit. But that lasted all year in 2021. He's even publicly, Taylor was like, we got to figure out better ways to work Mixon in, yada, yada. It seemed like coach speak after 2022 goes by and clear defined roles of them not trusting Joe Mixon in pass protection. Now, I do think that gets overblown. Like, because if we've talked long enough, I will evaluate the players and I'll critique the coaches, organization, the drafting, whatever it may be. It's all on the table. I believe they may be overvaluing the pass blocking aspect of Joe Mixon. If they don't trust him there, you're still running about 150 more routes than you are pass blocking. If any running back, just Samaje Perine, Joe Mixon, they all 3-to-1 ratio of running routes versus pass protection. So I think of that Chiefs game where Mixon's not in the game, Tyler Boyd's down, and they're doubling T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, right? This last AFC Championship game. And nobody underneath can get open. Samaje Perine's blanketed. He's not a route runner. He's not some fast, elusive guy. Hayden Hurst, Trenton Irwin, these guys are just blanketed. They're not that type of guy. And the Bengals and Joe Burrow's dropping back with a poor offensive line with a bunch of backups in front of them, thinking nobody's open. I'm just chucking this up to Higgins and Chase at this point. Yep. I'm sitting here like, man, get Mixon in there. I don't care if he can't press protect as good as Perine. At least he can win one-on-one most of the time and as a receiver or get him this ball in space as they're sending everyone back to cover these receivers. So I think the coaching staff should be more flexible with Mixon if he's on this roster. But if he's not, I would say it's because he doesn't fit this offense, not just in the passing game, but in the running game also, that shifted to an inside gap power scheme.
Yeah, I think that's the part. I don't think Mixon's a bad player even now. It's not like he's bad. But the coaches aren't leaving. And so you might want to put some blame on the coaching staff and how they used him, which we certainly did. A lot of people did after Super Bowl 56. But if you can take those assets and apply it elsewhere, make use of it elsewhere, and still have the same, if not more of an impact from, I don't know, one of the Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Like it seems like he would be on the field plenty, right? And let's say it's a backfield tandem of Zeke Elliott in the Perine role and Jahmyr Gibbs in the Mixon role. And I know it would be more hybrid, but I think that could be a really dynamic backfield where you do have that pass blocker and that veteran Perine, but it is now Zeke. And then you have this home run hitter that can catch 80 passes if you want him to, and Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield. I think that's as much of an argument as anything. It's not just the money. There's a ton of replacements out there as well, or guys in this draft that could do what Mixon has done. And let's continue the conversation with that. And we will do that up next. But first, a word from FanDuel. FanDuel is a one-stop shop for all things sports wagering. And right now, America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, by the way. You can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. I have it on my phone. You should too. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. And the NBA playoffs are just about here with the Lakers and Warriors making weird playoff pushes. Andrew Wiggins has returned. LeBron James making game winners on Tuesday night. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at an even bigger payout with the same game parlay. So get in on the action. Get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Joe, how much of this with the Mixon conversation has to do with what's out there and what's available and how they use him and being able to find, and this is a running backs question as much as it's a Mixon question, but being able to find a replacement that is as good or better for much less from a cost standpoint.
Yeah, so there's a few points here. Number one, I think the conversation rebubbled up when they didn't get a free agent back, right, in those first couple of weeks. It was like, well, okay, then what's happening? And the reports were that they offered Samaje Perine the same deal, but couldn't be committed to the time they were going to split with him at running back, right? Because the idea is they're going to draft a guy at some point. Even if you would have kept Perine and Mixon, you're probably still drafting a guy. If you're going to keep Perine and get rid of Mixon, you're drafting a guy. Zeke Elliott, name a veteran running back. They're going to draft one at some point. This is probably the deepest running back class since the Joe Mixon class, who had tons of guys that went in the first, second, even late to Aaron Jones on day 3.
Fournette, McCaffrey, that was the Kamara draft.
Yes,
where
Dalvin
the Bengals
Cook
were in on him. Dalvin Cook, yeah, there was a ton.
Yeah. It's silly. Even Austin Eckler undrafted. So it was all down throughout. It was a crazy.
Forgot about Eckler. Oh God.
This is that class again, and it's a cycle. It comes around every once in a while again. You're at that point. I wish they had enough picks to draft 2 of these guys because it's so deep. So now you're presented with the opportunity to potentially find a cheap, good option at running back in this class. And I think the way they have attacked free agency also, because they didn't get a veteran, but because they filled most of the needs that they needed to heading into the draft, you've now got glaring draft targets at probably tight end and running back, right? And you're saying, okay, you're probably going to take one of those in the top 4 or each of those in the top 4 picks in this draft. Who's it going to be at running back? And if you draft a guy, because most of these running backs, almost all of them, and when you guys spoke with Steve Radisevich, you got the same conclusion that I feel when I watch these guys. It's an unknown if they can block. It's an unknown if they can be the third down back. People ask me every time I'm watching a prospect, I'll put out clips on Twitter. Well, how's his blocking? You don't know, guys. He only did it 20 times all year. You have no clue if he can handle it or not. And they're not asking him to do full reads the way they will in the NFL. So how do you get a rookie running back on the field? It's probably as a runner first. It's probably in the Joe Mixon role first. If you're So if you think about it, like where's the opportunity going to come from? Where's that rookie going to bite into? It's going to be into Joe Mixon's role. So now even more, he is going to be used less and cost even more. And we haven't fully said it. If the Bengals decide to cut him after June 1st, they save $10.1 million against the cap. It puts a little bit of a hit this year and next year. But as the cap increases every year, that, putting it into future years is a smart thing to do. And the last point here is if you use EPA or any data source, it says that even like Derrick Henry at his best, his replacement cost to the backup or what he provides versus his backup running back is similar to like a wide receiver 3. So when I say a running back doesn't impact the game, even the special running backs, because there are so many teams have reliable number 2s and even number 3s, that the difference between these guys is not big. You could probably draft a guy in the 3rd, 4th round, and he would run all over the Bills in the same way that Joe Mixon did because the line was blocking, because everything was working on that day. It didn't take a special player to have that performance.
And that's the interesting element of it, because I agree. I think the quickest path for one of these rookies, Israel Abanikanda, right? Let's use him. 3rd round, 4th round, something like that. Late day 2, early day 3. If you land him, where is he going? He's not going in that pass catching receiving role. And the Bengals clearly want a guy who can pass block in that role, because Mixon can run routes. He can catch passes. He's still a good player, but are you paying that for what you would probably get if you had Israel Abanikanda on the roster as well, right? A guy who, if he gets to the second level, could take off and be explosive. I mean, one of the things, and I go back to this, whether you talk to Zach Taylor, Brian Callahan, anyone on offense, going into the 2022 season, they wanted to get more explosive in the run game. They knew that they had to get more explosive there, and they weren't. They just weren't. The 5-touchdown game, I get it, but Joe Mixon wasn't that explosive at the running back position. They need to get more explosive this offseason. And I know there's a lot that goes into that, second-level blocking, all of those things. A lot of it has to do with the running back as well.
So Joe Mixon, his breakaway percentage, this is 15-plus yard runs, 17%. He went from 14 in 2021 to 7 last year, 15-plus runs. It is the lowest rate in his career. His elusive rating this year, it's a PFF, how much do you make guys miss, right, per touch? was the second lowest of his career to his rookie season. So these are two numbers that start to show when a running back starts to decline. So to think that he would have a better year or have just as good of a year is probably too much hope rather than actual evaluation there. All the numbers and indications say that he's declining or starting to. He's still a good player, but if you want to catch it before that guy declines, not afterwards, you don't want to be sitting here with a guy that's costing you $12.76 million against the cap and he can't help your offense. So when the Bengals coaches and everyone talks about getting more explosive in the run game, why is it so important? Why do you want that home run hitter or that elusive guy at running back? We saw how much these offenses are these high-powered offenses, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Bengals, are facing these cover two shells, meaning two safeties back. Everyone's saying we're not going to let Jamar Chase go 50 yards over our head and gritty in the end zone. We're not going to watch that anymore, even though it'll still happen, right? But there as much shells as you can possibly imagine were played against the Bengals last year. And the Bengals struggled with it a little bit early in the year. And then they figured it out as the passing offense, became the number one passing offense against it. But it still didn't get teams out of it. The only way to get teams out of it and to get back those deep balls down the sideline more consistently to Higgins and Chase is to run the ball and have explosive runs. You can't just be a good running team. Take that Bills playoff game for an example. The Bills stayed in cover two the entire time. It did not flinch. Mixon's getting 4, 6, 8, 12, 4, 6. I mean, they're just running it down their throat. And the Bills are saying, fine, you continue to do that. You're going to have to go 12 plays to score. And the Bengals did because there was no resistance. But you're only going to get a defensive coordinator to come out of that shell and loosen up and give you these shots downfield to your weapons. You want to run the offense through Burrow, Higgins, and Chase. You want the downfield shots to be there. That's where these guys' strengths are. The only way to get a defense out of it is to scare them with a running back that goes 25, 35, 40 all the way down the sideline to the score because he makes that safety miss. He makes that guy miss in the hole, and then he rips it. And there's a lot of guys in this draft that can do that. That isn't what Mixon provides anymore. And it makes this offense worse because of it, because you're never going to get these passing options back open downfield with Mixon as the back.
I want to get into some of those guys, some of the draft prospects. But before we do that, let's kind of switch gears and look at the case for Mixon, right? We know he's a captain. We know he's an important part of the roster, all of those things. What if he's willing to take a pay cut? Can he still fit? Do you envision a scenario, you personally, where he could come in and maybe it's more of a pass catching back role? Maybe they do ask him to pass block a little bit more and try to trust him in that area. And instead of bringing in a Zeke Elliott or Rashawn Johnson, let's say, who's obviously known as a good pass blocking back, not sure if he will be in the NFL, but one of those guys, and they let Mixon do more of that. Could you see that role? Is a pay cut necessary in your mind? How do you view that? The case for keeping Mixon around in 2023?
Yeah, I think even if it's at 12.76 million, or if you can get it down to 6.5, 7 million with a pay cut and a complete new deal, basically is what it would be.
Yeah.
If either scenario, I would be approaching Mixon because I believe if you draft a guy, he's going to eat into Mixon's playing time as a runner, as the first and second down guy. So I would approach Mixon and say, listen, we like you. You're a captain. Your teammates like you. You're still effective. And I still want that power guy for those 2 or 3 games a year where you need to lean on one. He's good at it. And that Panthers game comes up. Remember, Jamar Chase is down. We're coming off that Monday night meltdown on what was it, Halloween against the Browns, right? Where we're like, man, we don't know if anything's going to happen here.
Mike Hilton was hurt. It was bleak. It was like, you better win this game going into the bye because they were 4-4. Yeah.
And they talked about how Brian Callahan went in and said, guys, we're running it down their throats. Get ready to go. And like sometimes you need that mindset and that reset. And I'm glad they had Joe Mixon for that because I do think it re-sparked them into being physical, being tough, and being willing to do whatever it takes to win the game, right? There is an element to that you need for running the ball. But I would approach Mixon and I'd say, listen, you're better as a receiving back than a running back at this point. That's still a huge element in our offense. We need you to be the guy that can block also. We need you to be the third down back also. Now, he's always had Giovanni Bernard. He's always had Samaje Perine. He's always had somebody that he can, all right, you take that role. That's your role. That's your job as the 2-minute back, as the third down back, pass protection back. hey, that guy's not here anymore, Joe. We
Now
need
it's
you
him.
to, you need to commit. You're the veteran in this room now. You commit in the offseason. We're going to work with you as much as we can. We need you to meet us in the other halfway, and you're going to be our pass protecting back. You're going to catch probably 60 balls again, and that's going to be your thing. And you're going to be able to focus on that and have that be your part of the game as you go forward. And the price, I would love if they can get it cheaper and use that money to extend Joe Burrow and T. Higgins. But even if not, the better way to use him would be to transition him into that role.
And it's going to be interesting to see if both sides can do that, right? Because there's trust issues, there's willingness issues, there's
Pride.
the fact that I do think that the Bengals are going to approach him about a pay cut minimum. And does that hurt feelings? Are they willing, if they do that and he says no, to just keep him around? Or do you, and usually when you do that and the veteran says no, then we know what the answer is. So there's a lot there, because you're right. It's not a sunk cost yet. And that's the point is, yeah, he's under contract. It's not a sunk cost. And you have a lot of other ways you could use that money. And by the way, I'm sure some are thinking, what about Jonah? We're actually going to talk about Jonah on tomorrow's show right here with Joe Goodberry. So that's a tease for that. But at running back, and Jake and I have had these debates, just transitioning from Mixon to the running backs in this class for a few minutes. Let's start with Bijan Robinson. I'm pretty much on record. I think if he's there at 28, he's probably the best player available. It's hard for me to find a scenario where that isn't the case. In some of these simulators on our mock draft earlier this week, I took Bijan, and I'm all about, if you can add this dynamic player, you do it. And I think he is that. And I know some would debate it and all of those things, but all the things that the Bengals are looking for at running back, based on what you've seen, could Bijan bring that? Would he bring value? Because I think special talents, even at running back, are still game changers. I think Christian McCaffrey, when healthy, is special, right? I think some of these guys do add. Could Bijan Robinson be that guy, or would you pass on him at 28?
So Bijan's going to end up as a top 5 player on our board. I mean, it's hard to deny it. He's got everything you're looking for. And in fact, if we were basing fit or judging fit, it could push him to number 1 on the board, because I think he would be a tremendous fit. They're a inside zone shotgun gap scheme at Texas. He's going to run the exact same stuff in Cincinnati, do everything out of the shotgun. He can pass protect just as good as you hear about Roschon Johnson. Bijan's just as good. The Texas, whoever's coaching them and whoever's asking them or telling them what they have to do, the responsibilities, it's the exact same, and they both do it very, very well. He's got great hands. He's elusive. He can rip off runs. Bijan would be a tremendous fit and would elevate this offense. You would probably cut Mixon right away. Like as soon as that pick's made, you're like, all right, sorry.
That's the one where it's like Burrow and Dalton.
Right.
And I've kind of put that out there. The Bengals knew they were taking Burrow, but they kept Dalton until after the draft and then moved on. I could totally see that in this scenario too with Mixon. Maybe not, but I could definitely see it.
So the only thing negative about that is the opportunity, right? The opportunity to draft a premium position or a high paid position or more of an impact position, which is defensive end, corner, offensive tackle. We don't need a receiver, but that would fall into that position grouping.
Jackson Smith and Jigba won't be there. But.
Sure, right. But that's the idea, is you'd rather draft a premium position player, because you can't, if you wait until the 2nd and 3rd rounds to draft an offensive tackle, you're probably not getting a good one, like just based on history. But if you draft a running back in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th round, you could find a guy that complements your offense and is really good. And, so the opportunity there to draft a premium position, it's going to be dependent on each person here. You ask me, you ask you, you ask other guys. Balancing that internally on saying this guy is a blue chip player, and I think he'd be an instant impact player and elevate our offense versus, yeah, but is that better than drafting Darnell Wright, Kalijah Kancey, and then Israel Abanikanda in the 3rd, right? Is that, which one of those options are better than taking Bijan Robinson and then Blake Freeland, let's say, in the 3rd, if he's still there? So like, you've got to balance that. And I don't know what the right answer is.
All right. First off, give me the scenario where it's Kalijah Kancey, Darnell Wright, and Bijan Robinson at 28. If they're all there, give me that scenario,
right? Because
that would be fun. I think I would take Wright. It's tough. It's Wright or Kancey for me if those two guys are there.
Right.
The
Bijan scenario has to be, yeah, exactly.
I think they would be gone though in the scenario where Bijan falls. But, right? I mean, but maybe not. Which maybe 18 quarterbacks go, and then it could be really fun. Jahmyr Gibbs, they met with him at the combine. How would he fit in this offense, do you think?
So Gibbs looks like Chris Johnson, Jamal Charles, right?
All
like
right.
Guys, I know.
All right. Well, if he looks like that, then I don't. I mean,
honestly,
Chris Johnson was amazing.
He's a sleeper for pick 28. People keep putting like, what if Gibbs in round 2? No, he's a sleeper for pick 28 in a scenario where the tight ends are gone, maybe the top tackles, because Darnell Wright, I think, could go top 20. And a scenario where they are lower on Kalijah Kancey. Now, I would knock them completely if we're not taking Kancey, right? A scenario where they're lower on maybe that second grouping of corners, and they are really high in Gibbs. Gibbs is going to grade really high for us, which usually has a strong correlation. The Bengals typically are drafting close to who's highest on our boards when they're on the clock. He is a home run threat, obviously, crazy speed, agility, good patience, doesn't have the power like the Chris Johnson and the Jamal Charles type. Just he will run it inside because he's tough enough to do it. Really presses the hole really well, strings linebackers along with him, and then just outraces them to the corner, and they can't touch him. But as a receiver, man, he put on the Texas game, and he's running Texas routes against Texas linebackers and just murdering these guys and just wide open. And having that in that Chiefs AFC Championship game, they wouldn't have doubled. They would not have doubled Chase and Higgins the way they did in that game, because he would have been catching these over the middle and going 40 yards down the middle. And it would have been like, all right, we got to get out of here. We got to put a safety on this guy. We got to get somebody better to cover this man. Or we have to blitz, which great, blitz him because he's not a great pass protector. Alabama asked him to do a lot, but only 1 year in that system after transferring from Georgia Tech. So defense would say, all right, we'll blitz Gibbs and make him mentally process this. Okay, you got Joe Burrow. Come on, blitz me, and we'll find the open guy. I think Gibbs would be a tremendous pick if you can get him at the right value. I just don't know if that's at 28 or not.
33, trade down, something like that. Like they took Gio. One, the 28th pick, I know it's still first round, but it's barely first round. So, but two, if you trade down to 33 or 34, there's a benefit to that. But the other part, if you don't want to give running back second contracts, the 5th-year option is nice. Yep. So there is some interesting aspects to it. But you describing that, I think a lot of our listeners would forget, or maybe not even have watched Chris Johnson in his prime. He was an absolute animal. And then Jamal Charles was probably the most underrated running back in my lifetime.
Yes.
I mean, he's unbelievable. So if you could get, especially Charles, because he's a great pass catcher too, I thought. Mm-hmm. So that would be fun. All right, some other backs that stand out to you. I've talked about Israel Abanikanda on this draft. He's not on this podcast. He's not really the pass catcher, but I like him a lot. I'm sure you probably like him a lot. I like his name at least.
I do.
But what else? What other guys stand out, including Abanikanda?
Yeah, so quickly on Abanikanda, his hands are fine, his routes are fine. They just didn't use them that much in there. It's just how offenses work in college. Sometimes they just don't use the running back in that facet of the game, but he can do it, and I thought he did really well every time he caught the ball. But I would take Abanikanda, home run threat. The only probably home run threat in this class that's also 215. That's got to be appealing to the Bengals. If they want a big back to replace it, but a guy who actually can rip one down the field and go the whole distance, it's Abanikanda. I wouldn't be surprised if it was round 2, pick 60, if they took him there. Because I would have Zach Charbonnet.
Young too. He's young too.
He's 20 right now, currently 20 years old. 20.6, I believe, if I remember correctly, at draft time. So he was going to finish most of this year before he even turns 21. And we've seen how that's worked out with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. When they draft young guys that have produced, man, they become instant stars and studs for this team. And I think the Bengals like that, the way they've drafted the last few years. I think Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA could be a second-round pick. He's more of the bell cow type, but he's probably the second best inside shotgun runner behind Bijan Robinson. Very manipulative runner, very hard to tell which hole he's going to hit. He's patient. He's accurate in his footwork and his steps. That helps your offensive line look good when they know where the guy's going and how fast he is and when he's going to bounce out. It really, offensive linemen are going to love blocking for this guy. He's got good hands. He can pass protect as well. He just does not have the home run ability. He will make that safety miss and then get caught by the other safety. So it's like
Rudy Johnson.
faster than Rudy, more agile than Rudy, but I would say he's more of Corey Dillon. Corey Dillon was fast for a big back, but so in between. So if Corey was like fast for a big back and Rudy was like slow for a big back, Charbonnet's closer to Dillon. He's not completely to that level, but I think speed is probably the most overrated thing when it comes to running backs. So you can still rip one if you get the right situation. The thing is with the Bengals, they're not going to get a lot of heavy boxes, because that's why Derrick Henry rips off these long runs. It's because everyone's going heavy boxes against Tennessee. He breaks the one line and he's gone. The Bengals aren't going to get that. So you need a guy with speed and elusiveness. I think this class is full of them. If you get into now day 3 or third round or later, and a guy I just watched today out of ECU, Keaton Mitchell, we talked about Chris Johnson. He's from the same school there. But he's 5'8", 180. So there's a lot of these small guys, Devin A-Chain, guys that have the speed that could be complementary pieces. Are they 3rd, 4th, 5th rounders? Deuce Vaughn is another one, extremely small but complementary pieces that help you. And I'm just saying, like, if we're in the 5th round and you haven't taken a running back, and this is maybe the Bengals have already addressed this position by then, but
probably. But
I'm thinking of that Chiefs game and that still image of the running back not being able to get open, tight end, slot receiver, backup slot, not being able to get open. You put Deuce Vaughn in that position, he's going to get open, and you're going to use him as a weapon. So even spending a 2nd pick on a running back would not offend me at all. And then I like some of the later round guys like Eric Hall or Deneric Prince, who is actually the Bengals running back coached him a couple of years ago as well at Tulsa. I think he is a big back with long speed. He runs and looks like Joe Mixon. I posted a lot of clips on my Twitter page of him. I think he's probably a 5th, 6th, 7th rounder, but he's Mixon that runs a 4.4.
Okay. And he's going to fall. You think he's going to be that late?
I do think so, only because this class is extremely deep.
Yeah, that's sign me up. By the way, we've talked about Deuce Vaughn. I said get Joe Burrow as Darren Sproles. Wouldn't mind that one bit, even if they do go running back early. I think the 2 positions that they could double up on, tight end and running back. And I know they only have 7 picks. Who knows what happens? But I think there's just going to be a lot of scenarios where they look up and they're like, the best player available is a tight end or is a running back. Certainly running backs, because teams could wait on them. This was a lot of fun, Joe. Go ahead.
They've doubled up at linebacker. Last year they doubled up at safety because you just get slapped in the face with value that they're like, you know what, we'll do it and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah. And in that, I think it's going to pay off at safety. It paid off at linebacker. We'll see if it pays off if they do it again this year. Joe will be back on tomorrow's show talking about Jonah Williams and his future in Cincinnati. Should he be the right tackle? Should the Bengals be right tackle or bust at 28? We will discuss that and more. Hopefully you enjoyed this throwback edition of Locked On Bengals. For Joe Goodberry and Jake Lisco, I'm James Rapien. Thank you so much for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast.